Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. I'm Scott Lohmann. On tonight's program, we're going to look at a different subject than we usually do. We're actually going to bring in a liberal Christian, and we're going to talk about some of the case areas where humanism and liberal Christianity will link up to be together, some places where we're different, and just get a feeling that, you know, we're not always out to get the people at the other end of the spectrum who don't share our beliefs. So I'd like to welcome Doug Pagitt to the program.
Scott, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and you're local. You do a local radio program.
I do, and yes, and I have a church in Minneapolis.
You have a church in Minneapolis. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. It's called Solomon's Porch, and we're located on 46th Street, just west of Nicollet Avenue. On Blaisdell. So, and we've been around for 12 years.
Okay.
And it's a community of artists and social do-gooders and Christian people and people who aren't professing Christians, but they're a part of this community because, as we like to say there, we want to live our lives in the way of Jesus in the world. Okay. So we're Jesus-y in that sense. But I think we're also a part of a large movement in North America to do religion a little differently. Okay.
Yeah, I do listen to a variety of stuff on that, and there's versions of Christianity that find your end of it a bit on the scary side because you're moving away from the hardcore, whip people into shape style Christianity.
Yeah, Christianity is a complex family.
Yes.
And there's the family squabbles are endless, and we are not held in high favor by all members of the family.
Okay.
That way. And some of that's people growing and working it out and figuring out how they should live in the world, and some of it's people being nasty, and some of them are just good old honest disagreements about how we should live in our world. And we have the sense that you can walk arm in arm with people that you don't see eye to eye with.
Yeah,
and
that's very much a humanist approach too. That's one thing that we look to do as part of the Humanists of Minnesota is that once we're done with the not believing in God, in our case, it's like, okay, so that's that. Now what do we do? So then it's the humanist ethics of going forward, of connecting with our fellow human beings. And since we're, from our point of view, all that's here, we need to figure out how to work together to solve problems because there's nobody else out there to help us.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I come from a theological perspective that would argue that the same kind of argument, that what we're called to as people in the Jesus narrative is to be fully about this life here and now. So in the Jesus language, Jesus would say, the kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is among you. This is it.
Okay.
This is, now it may not be all of it, but it's still it.
Okay.
Right? It's, and so in the kind of tradition that I come from, you don't compete the future against the present.
Okay.
So there's no trade-off if you are one who holds to an afterlife or not.
Okay.
That's really not in the conversation set any longer.
Which we like from our point of view because that gives us more, because we tend to focus on the here and now.
Yeah.
Because from our point of view there is not anything afterwards. Right. So it's kind of silly to think we're going to move on to something better when we need to make sure that other people can simply move along.
Right. Oh, that's a great phrase. Yeah, and we are often a part of a conversation within Christianity. People at Solomon's Porch, my church, and a whole network of churches around the world are like this, who are trying to constantly remind other Christians that the here and now really matters. In fact, we're often accused of being humanists.
Okay.
So it's sort of interesting. So when we met a few years ago, I felt a bit of affinity toward what you all are about, because some of the more heavenly minded and future focused Christian parts of the Christian family often accuse us of basically just being a religious version of you all.
Yeah, it's interesting to listen to some of the sparks fly in that, because it's like, okay, their spats are not quite as scary as some of our, even humanist atheists, we have a few things going on because there's some debates like that, but it does help to know that there are ones where we can look at the same things and come up with ways to work together, to work on social issues like the gay marriage amendment that's coming up in Minnesota in fall of 2012. We're taping this in the spring of 2012. Are you guys, against that?
Yeah, so I'm somebody who's advocating on the within the Christian community to try to get people to defeat that amendment.
Okay, so that's a case where we'll probably end up working together.
I would imagine, on that political issue and on a whole number of other issues of how human beings should treat one another.
Yeah.
I can't imagine there's a lot of sunlight between our
No, there
between
wouldn't. It doesn't
our
sound like that.
differences.
So,
And I often wonder why there is such a level of animosity between the two. And I know it comes from both camps, and I've got a bit of an idea why the Christian people are afraid of humanists. But I sometimes wonder why humanists...
more of it's that some of us, come out of certain traditions and we're burned by religion. And so there's a factor in that with some. But as you get past that, then you start looking and realizing that Christianity is not all one flavor. There's a fuller spectrum, but the trick is for us figuring out who's closer to our part of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And that we don't necessarily know because we're not necessarily flowing through that. We're keeping an eye on the ones that are out to do the bad stuff.
Well, and I've wondered if sometimes humanists and atheists as well feel as almost like a persecuted group in the United States in their experience, and have a bit of reluctance to too closely connect with religious communities.
There can be on that, especially when you look at some of the reactions to the Reason rallying, but the fact that they even did it was cool, that they had 20 to 30,000 people showing up in Washington, D.C. to do that. So we're getting attention. We're also seeing things because the nuns, when you take a look at religious surveys, are growing in our country.
The non-affiliated.
The non-affiliated within they're saying none to any religion. They're not saying Christian, they're not saying Buddhist, they're not saying Muslim.
Right. They're not even in relationship to a religious.
Right, and so then we're trying to help figure out to market ourselves so that they will see that we're an option, because one of the cool things I noticed about the American Humanist Association, which is our parent organization that chartered our chapter, did a bus ad campaign a couple of years ago that said, "Be good for goodness sake," and it had a Santa, or a mall Santa on there, and that got controversy. And to me, that was cool because one, it was getting controversy, and two, they knew we were on the map. We hadn't even pissed anybody off enough to know that there were humanists out there. So, it was interesting saying, well, who are they to start saying things? So with us, some of it's letting people know it's there, because usually the only people who know about humanists are people who are in the Unitarian end of the spectrum who have decided, well, I'm maybe, they share the philosophy, or they're even ready to leave even the churchiness of Unitarianism.
And I know in the Christian tradition there's a bit of a problem, because there's this big question amongst a lot of Christians that if you're not religious, can you be moral? It's an intriguing. And I was raised in a family with no religion at all.
Okay.
So until I was 17 years old, I hadn't been in a church building. I didn't know any of that kind of function or what way that all went. So I wasn't raised with a religious tradition or impulse or anything. I had a very deep sense of God since I've had memory. So I'm just one of those people that nothing I can do about it. It's just there. But I was raised by parents who wanted me to choose on my own and didn't push religion. I had no religious sort of experience at all. So it's intriguing to me when I hear Christian people say, well, can you be moral if you're not religious? And I'm like, that is so, at one level it's so insulting to me, right? Because I feel like, really? That implicates so many people who have lived and who will continue to live. It's just a ludicrous question, but it's real to people, isn't it?
It is.
When you see the surveys, many people believe that if you're not religious, that believe in God, then you wouldn't derive any kind of morality. I even heard on a news program this weekend talking about, because it was Easter, we were filming this just on Sunday, and so the news programs do their Easter stuff. Because it still does draw ratings, right? It's like Time Magazine and Newsweek, they all do their religious stuff.
They've had a couple of covers like that recently.
Yeah, it's their biggest selling magazines of the year. So
there you
go. So it is still a market. But it was raised that, the idea was raised that about Mitt Romney being the nominee as a Mormon, which is a big deal. And the commentator said, well, you still couldn't be an atheist and have a chance of running for president. Because people believe that you can't be moral without
a belief in
God. And I find that I find that perplexing personally. I'm sure that you all in the work that you do find it more than perplexing. I would imagine it's maddening. So I don't know. I don't know where that comes from, but.
We think it's many. It's a case of not getting to know us, as human beings. My neighbor, who we affectionately referred to as the little old lady next door, before she passed away, we would talk about religion. In fact, she and I, she wanted to watch the show A History of Disbelief that was done by Jonathan Miller, which is a brilliant series on looking at what first he decides, well, if we're going to talk about non-belief, we need to know what we mean by belief and non-belief. So, of course, from our tradition, he starts and he talks, and it's great because he's a very talented fellow. So she and I watched that together, but she kept saying, you can't be an atheist. You're too good.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the disconnect.
Yeah. Do you think it's a cultural, like a generational thing where like not believing in God went with communism, and communism meant defying the morals of America? Like it was all framed that way.
There was a lot of that connection that was done. There was there was the term godless atheist to be an insult.
Yes.
Which we occasionally bounce back at them saying, because it's not, because it's like, we are in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of that on there, and it's a case of some pastors at some end of the spectrum using us as the boogeymen because we're out sort of undermining what would be their whole job description.
Yeah.
Because since you're a little similar to us, it's not like you're out to have to reconvert everybody.
Yeah, and I'm one of those evangelizing Christians, right? But I just think the story of God is different than a lot of other Christians think it is. So what I'm trying to invite people into is more about the resonance of the life of God that I think is inside of everyone, and we should live in harmony with that which is within us. And I think that's very God. And so I understand that kind of impulse, right, of Christians who want to do the evangelizing. But what I don't get is, and this is speaking more to my own Christian family of the broad tradition, is why you would not want atheism to be a perfectly good option that you're not choosing.
Yeah.
This is where I would say that as an evangelist, I would want people to say, look, atheism is a good option for me, and I'm not choosing that. I'm choosing this other thing, as opposed to, look, you got to believe in God because that's just the default.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that just doesn't seem to fit at all. And I think I think Christianity would be better represented if people had the sense that Christians really thought that other views were a legitimate option, right? And that your choice to be Christian, or your recognition of your upbringing, or your sensibility and coming to terms with what's inside of you, is one of the options of life.
Yes.
As opposed to you're trying to not devolve into something like an atheist.
Yeah. So, then what we do is, we want to look, because then there are things we can work on in society on that, because we know, your book here we've got, which is A Christianity Worth Believing, subtitled Hope-Filled, Open-Armed, Alive and Well Faith. And the further subtitle for the left out, left behind, and the let down in us all, which that's kind of fun. You like playing on a number of things.
Yes.
I like a good title.
Yeah. The left behind category.
Yeah, the left behind part of it. So
Christianity for the rest of us.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun on that. But we can work on issues, because you guys would not be against good science in being taught in the schools.
Yeah, that's one of the big dividing points in some Christian circles is, what do you do with science? And I don't know that that Christians of my ilk would want to see science supplant religion. I think that the human being has many ways of knowing and understanding our world, and organizing and categorizing our world. And they're, as I've referred to previously, they should be friends with benefits. Maybe they shouldn't marry, because when science and religion have been married in the past, it hasn't served well for either.
No, it doesn't work well for either.
But they shouldn't be strangers, and they certainly shouldn't be enemies. So I thought friends with benefits would be sort of that they could help each other.
That's a good term there, because then we can make sure that because basically without the theory of evolution, we don't understand a lot about biology. And with what's going on in our world with global climate change, what's going on with that, with human beings still overpopulating the planet, which is an issue we like bringing up because that's the elephant in the room when it comes to resources and that, is that we're still not talking about how many more human beings keep arriving on the planet, and that that's gonna be bad for not just us, the planet as well. So when we can have that discussion and have people say, yeah, you guys are bringing in some good points, we'll help with that this point to the message, which still will help all of us in the process.
Yeah, and it's a big problem, this battle of science versus religion, and it's turning up strangely in the conversation currently going on, in spring of 2012 about the federal government requiring religious institutions to behave in healthcare, insurance issues like everyone else. And those really are the same issues, at least in my mind. The way I see it, they're the same situation is at hand, which is oftentimes, too often, religious people want to act as if they play by a different set of rules. So their faith gives them a worldview that doesn't have to understand science, because there's this other world that's really more important. And I'm a Christian, right? And so I feel that very deeply when I hear people talk like that. Or in the social science area, they act like, well, no, we should operate by a different set of rules and shouldn't have to play well with everyone else. And we've been trying to figure that out in society for a very long time. At least the last 700 years has the question of what does the church and the magisterium, the religious structure and a self-professing person, how do they play with the other questions of knowledge in our society and ways that we know to organize. And religion is inherently conservative.
Yes.
Like not on a political spectrum,
right,
although it can be on a political spectrum, but it is part of the culture that wants to conserve or keep the same.
Yes.
And so progressiveness doesn't fit religion well. I would happen to argue, and I do in the book, that Christianity does not do well as a conservative movement. That Christianity is very progressive, if you know the Christian story and the Jesus story and the Spirit of God on all people story. Like when I profess that, that's what motivates me to be a more progressive person, is my Christianity. So I feel like sometimes that Christianity doesn't make a very good religion either, even though it is sort of in our context the most dominant religion and gets usurped for that purpose.
Yeah, and that it is a very complex conversation, and a lot of people think it should be more black and white, but as a humanist, I know that's a nuanced decision.
Yeah.
And being both a Minnesotan and a humanist, we tend not to be as evangelical in the sense of spreading the word about ours as we should. But that's because many of us came through a long struggle, and we're here sometimes to help them say, welcome over to our side here.
You mean a long struggle of having been raised in a religious...
We're raised, and many of us come from religious backgrounds. There's not that many in our groups who were actually raised as free thinkers and non-believers, where that was the deliberate religious thing of the parents. Whereas, so it makes us an interesting mix, because some people come running out from there going, I need to get away from all of those, and we're a refuge. And but we also want to let people know that humanism is more than just a refuge for that we do offer a full philosophy of life and approach for that. And we're working on that, but as a small group, you have the advantage that you have a permanent location.
Right.
We're a small group that has no permanent location.
And we choose to organize in that kind of communal or congregational sense, which covers a multitude of sins, right? Community is a very grace distributing mechanism so often, and having communities, having a lived community of people who share their lives with one another in agreement and in not yet agreement is a really powerful part of what it means to be a Christian person. And I've often thought that humanists ought to have something more like that.
Yes.
And I don't know how that would ever happen or get there. I chose to be in the religious tribe.
And it really varies, because we have humanists that find that live are perfectly at home in a number of Unitarian congregations or societies. because they're very much humanist and have just a little bit of other stuff, and they can cope with that quite fine. Yeah. But we also have humanists that will even totally say, that's too much of a churchy building even for me. So we have to try and find a happy medium between those that say, we don't want to save any of it. We're getting rid of the whole shooting match of religion.
No, I understand that completely, and that's one of the like my experience with oftentimes with Unitarian Universalist churches is that they often feel very churchy. Interestingly, like our community isn't. We sit on household furniture, and we've renovated an old church building and made it feel more like a living room or a coffee house or something. But oftentimes you have these progressive Christian movements whose structure, their way of acting, is very churchy feeling. And then you get conservative churches that don't look like that at all. They're very kind of hip and happening. What a lot of people would really like is kind of a normal place with normal ways of interacting and not all that weird churchy stuff that talk about progressive things and ideas. So I think there's a market in there for you somewhere.
There is, and
there's a bunch of church buildings for sale in Minneapolis that are quite cheap because they're closing all over the place.
We're
pick them up all the time.
Working with Minnesota Atheists as a concept, looking for a home on that. So that would be a new step for us to go that, because then we're doing, and so it does make our community rather interesting as we try and balance off those things, because there are the advantages of having a permanent home. You got a place you can set people. We're here on this day. We're doing X on this day.
Yes.
You don't have to go out searching for locations.
Right, especially and because either humanism or Christianity they tend to be very conceptual, right? They kind of live in this ideas, belief, opinions realm, and so having a place where you can be a people of a place is even perhaps more important with those of us who also believe that ideas matter, right? So I mean, I write books and have a radio show, and you do the same thing because we think ideas matter.
Yes.
They're not everything. But they matter.
And they're important.
And having a place is a pretty important part of it. And I'll tell you a little dirty little secret with a lot of churches. There's a lot of people who are in churches fairly regular because it's meaningful for them to be a part of a community.
Yes.
But when you start talking and you open up and create a safe place where the no talk rules are broken, there's an awful lot of people who would say, look, I'm a little shaky on all these beliefs.
Like a number of these doctrines over here.
It's why you often hear religious people talk about having faith and not just belief, because we kind of know they're made of a bit of a different substance, right? So there's an awful lot of people who are in churches, and they're not just the ushers that hang out in the lobby, going for the sermon. It's people sitting in for the sermons as well. They're like, this is part of my communal life, but not necessarily my personal belief system. And that's of great consternation to religious people. I go to conferences all the time where pastors are recognizing this and shaking their fists at it. I happen to think it's really good news, and we should find ways in our community for those people to be able to say more than they often say. We should need to create safer environments for those people to speak, because belief and opinion are almost indefinable, undefinable, indivisible from one another. So we shouldn't put so much weight on people's opinions. They're often temporary and have people hold them for very good reasons. So I think we should be a little bit more open and less in danger, feel less in danger.
The really doctrinal stuff, because do you know the joke one of the comedians did where this guy's about to jump off the bridge and he says, "Oh, don't do that." And he says, "What are you?" "I'm a Christian." And then they start breaking down to where they are. And it goes on for a number of lines, and then they finally come to the wrong split and he pushes him off. And when you get those people that say, "I have to have everybody,"
like blue hymnal or red hymnal, and he goes heretic and pushes him off.
Do you believe in all these things? And they need to have everybody following that. Whereas we know as humanists, many of us have gotten there, through different paths. Some have gone through by, with us, it's the thinking. It's like that did in a bunch of us, where it's like, okay, start thinking about this. It's like, oh, that was the wrong question. Because that's once I started, and it is a quest for truth that we've gone through. So we've gone through going, okay, if this is real, I want to find other stuff on that. So,
and it's I've just recently, in the last 2 years, come to understand why some Christians are afraid of this, and it was really quite surprising to me, because I've always been that free-thinking person. I fashion myself a contrarian and pushing boundaries and all these things. And some of these folks that we talked about earlier who don't always think that my perspective should be the one getting the most airtime, have framed the idea of questions and doubt in terms of the first 3 chapters of Genesis, which you might know, it's the Garden of Eden narrative.
Yes.
And they will say, well, what was the role of the serpent, the snake, the Satan,
Right.
to doubt and to put doubt in the mind of Eve? So they would say, in the big story, the one saying, did God really say? That's the role of the tempter. So you people with all your questions, you're playing the role of the tempter.
Okay.
And it helped me to see when they explained this that like, oh, you see us all as characters in this play.
Yes.
And that's the role we're playing, is the role of the tempter.
Yep, we're trying to talk them away from their safe place.
Yes, and so me as a Jesus-following Christian would say, I actually think it would be more in terms of Jesus saying, you've heard it said, but I say to you, which is even more than questioning. It's really creating an alternative. It's not just what you've heard in the religious system. It's also this new command I give to you, this new understanding. And so how we structure the story, whether you're the tempter or the savior, makes all the difference in the world, right?
Yeah, but that's the fun thing, is I'm a story guy. I came to humanism through science fiction and my favorite show, Star Trek, by learning to think and looking at how they use story to talk about issues on that. And I can see that, some of that in the Bible, but for me, some of those are like, I'm not a shepherd and I don't do the old fuel thing anymore. It's like, sorry, your storylines don't connect.
That's
so
right, yeah.
We're down to about the last minute. So, there's, we've got a great connection on this. So, there's still differences that we will have. It's like,
For sure.
on that. But, I'm the one that it says usually in there is that,
For the left out, left behind, and left down in us all.
Yeah, that we can find connections in that way, and a dialogue is a great thing.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. May you live long and prosper.
Excellent. So thanks for coming, Doug. Really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Honor.
And Doug's book is A Christianity Worth Believing, and you can find it on his website, and that's been flashing up throughout the show. And I've had hair issues the whole program. So check that out. But if you've got more questions about us, the Humanists of Minnesota, you can go to our website at humanistofmn.org. We have old versions of this program on there. We'd like to hear what you think about this program and topics you'd like to see us discuss in the future. So send us either an email, or there's a phone number on there, or you can send one of those old-fashioned lettery things that you put a stamp on and mail. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohmann. Good night.